Today I wanted to talk about the topic of AI in the context of art and concept art and add my contribution to the discussion that's happening right now, how I feel about it as a concept artist, and realistically where I see it going and the role it may play in the industry, in jobs in the next 10 years. And I thought I'd include some pre-production sketching I've been working on recently that is going to be a part of a course that I'm building. So you're probably all familiar with AI tools and what developments have been happening in recent years, or even in the last 6 months. You'll know about AI image generation, plenty of other AI-assisted workflows that have been making their way into digital art tools, like Photoshop's generative fill, AI upscaling, or even 3D asset generators. I thought it would be good to frame the format of this discussion by talking about the pros and cons, and this is just how I see it currently, and just my opinion based on my probably limited experience. So if you feel like there's something that I haven't covered in enough nuance or detail, I definitely welcome discussion down in the comments. So AI image generation, what do I think are the pros? Where do I think it excels? So I think what it excels at is obviously speed and rapid generation. So pooping out a ton of images all at once. So for concept artists and designers, what role do I see that playing? Well, I think based on my own experience and experimentation in the last couple of years, I think the best I can say is that it still really belongs in very early preliminary idea generation phases. And what I mean by that is I would probably opt to use it, if I was going to use it at all, as a jumping off point, similar to how I might look at clouds in the sky to find interesting ideas or interesting shapes. I certainly wouldn't rely on it. I think I would balance out my use of it as a tool for that with doing research and gathering reference. I do think, generally speaking, no tool should be lent on too heavily because an over-reliance on any one tool is a real crutch to artists. And one thing I've noticed as well, and this is another use for AI that I think we all use in recent years, and that's large language models like ChatGPT, and that is for solving our problems for us in a more conceptual sense. So to give you an example, I might ask ChatGPT to give me a brief, say, for an environment design, like a written brief. And if you're not a creative writer, like if you're primarily a concept artist and you want to create an artwork that has a bit of backstory, I think it can be quite a useful tool for that. But applying the same logic that I spoke about just before in terms of using it as a crutch, I think we still need to be careful of an over-reliance on AI in that domain as well. And the reason I say that is because one of the skills that is going to make you as an individual the most dangerous in any field, not just concept art, is your ability to think. And I think that an over-reliance on things like ChatGPT to formulate the perfect story or the perfect job application, or, let's say the perfect YouTube script, for example, it takes away from your ability to problem solve those things for yourself. So it reduces your capacity to think and problem solve, not just as an artist, but as a human being, because it's a muscle that you're not using anymore. You're not practicing thinking about things conceptually and problem solving things conceptually. And also the tools, as good as they are at imitating written human communication, they're also only trained on the information that's available to them based on the training data. And they're very good at imitating what they think we want to hear, but definitely fall short in terms of connecting hundreds of contextual pieces of information and how they all interconnect together. So again, for the same reason, using tools like ChatGPT, I would definitely caution any creative to treat it in the same way that I spoke about just before and use it purely as a form of exploration and experimentation in an extremely early phase. But from personal experience, I've found that for it to really be useful, I've pretty much always had to take what it outputs and take matters into my own hands and refine it myself. And I know that sounds pretty obvious, but the reason I think it's worth bringing up is because especially aspiring artists, creators, writers these days, I think there's a temptation to have an over-reliance on these kind of tools. And this is coming from someone who was learning concept art during the time period where photo bashing and 3D had started to become really popular as tools in an artist's toolkit that could speed up the workflow. And during that time, I was also heavily invested in upskilling in those areas because I saw how powerful they were in terms of creating high quality end results at speed. And I think any creative can relate to the allure of things that take out the hard work and effort from a creative process, especially when there's an impatience to deliver something that you could get paid for, that would make you money, or that would allow you to create something that on the surface looks impressive. But I would advise the same level of caution, even with those kind of workflows as well, for any creative looking to make money from their skills and expertise. Consider yourself warned. There will come a time where the tools you're relying too heavily upon cannot help you. The needs of a project or client at a certain point become so custom and so nuanced that only a nuanced approach can solve a nuanced problem. And I think that's an area that is, to be honest, severely overlooked by anyone who is overly bullish on AI and AI tools. I think in a lot of cases, it's become the next thing that people can see as solving all their problems. Especially, I can see the appeal for, let's say, you're an indie developer with not as much art experience and you need assets for a game, or you need concept ideas to help you generate ideas for your game levels. I can definitely see its usefulness in those arenas. And I'm not going to poo-poo anyone that uses AI to solve problems in areas they might not be as skilled at, especially not for smaller, independent developers. But I will say this, if you spend all of your time as an artist learning only tools that are going to speed up your workflow, but not integrating that with practicing fundamentals of good design, good storytelling, increasing your knowledge of different pipelines and what problems you need to be solving in a more holistic approach, as in thinking about the big picture of what you're creating in the context of a product and everything that needs to happen in order for that product to be fully realized, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot in terms of staying competitive if you want to be in this field long term. I would say even if AI didn't exist at all, I think this would be a major mistake that in the long term is going to hurt your ability to provide value to a production team. So I think maybe to summarize, I think where it excels is to assist with the idea generation process as a jumping off point, and some AI tools could also assist in repetitive tasks. But what it can't do, and what I don't see it doing anytime soon, is creating artworks or images or designs that have intent, that have nuance, that create designs or images where it thinks like an artist and takes into account hundreds of interconnected novel conceptual ideas at one time, a deep understanding of storytelling and human psychology, again, very much conceptual domains. So context and story, it struggles creating purpose-driven and interconnected designs. There's also originality concerns, an over-reliance on these tools. There's always a chance, because a lot of these models are trained on past works made by other artists that most often have been scraped en masse from artists on the internet, which means that in terms of originality and copyright, you can never be totally confident that what it's spitting out isn't going to be derivative at best. And playing devil's advocate here for a second, I've seen a lot of folks who express the sentiment that, well, that's just the same as a DJ taking samples from different IPs and remixing them, or, isn't everything just a remix? And I can understand that, but it's important to remember that a key component of those kind of remixes is an artistic eye, a certain level of curation, the intentional combining of that with the artist's personal lived experience and their taste. The fact that it's not only the raw input that's being recycled, but it's also the conceptual ideas themselves. And on top of that, it's the conceptual ideas as interpreted by that individual. It's those combination of things that creates the novel output from the artist. Contrasting that to an AI that's purely replicating the end output from multiple different sources, but nothing else, nothing conceptual, not integrating the millions of tiny inputs of lived experience that influence a person's taste, an individual's lifetime's worth of experience and knowledge and visual library. It doesn't have any of that. And I think in the long term, like we're in an era at the moment where it's still fresh and new, and on the surface it's producing what looks like crazy new ideas. And don't get me wrong, like we have seen some crazy stuff that we haven't seen before. But in the context of creating for games or films or animation, to create designs or artwork or storytelling that resonates with people on that deeper level, those components, those factors of design that communicate something that sparks an emotional response in other humans. It's my opinion that only that combination that an artist or a human brings to the creative process, only those conceptual influences, that lived experience, the lived visual library, the conceptual understanding of human psychology and principles of design, the deep understanding that can only happen on a human level, I think those are still things that will always be valued. I think those are still things that, at the end of the day, will always resonate the most with audiences. And so I think as artists, not just concept artists, but any kind of creative field in general that has concerns about the future or is asking questions like, is my job safe? I think if you're in a creative field and you're lucky enough to where that level of creative input is an essential part of your job, I would say for those jobs, they're probably not going away anytime soon. But there's plenty of other jobs where quote unquote menial tasks like creating assets from something that's already been established or doing something repetitive, especially for 3D artists or even certain 2D fields like asset creation. I am a little bit more concerned about the long-term prospects of those roles. So it's probably a good time to transition into speaking about how I see it affecting the industry and the job market. I think it is going to be very disruptive. I think it already is very disruptive. I think it will replace certain menial tasks, and it's only going to get better for things like asset creation or converting a design to 3D, or really like the creation of any secondary or background supporting element in a game, say for example, creating a pile of trash or creating a bunch of set dressing background components in an environment, especially for realistic IPs where a certain style, a certain strict style guide isn't as important. I'd say, yeah, a lot of those sort of more cumbersome tasks, more repetitive, more menial tasks will become the domain of AI. And depending on the context, that can be a really good thing, right? Like maybe you're an indie dev that needs to generate a bunch of that stuff quickly. I can see the usefulness in cases like that. However, looking at it from a more holistic viewpoint, sort of stepping back, looking at it industry-wide and played out over the course of the next decade, I think that's going to create a real problem in the long term, in that there won't be a place for a lot of junior artists in certain pipelines. And while that might save companies money in the short term, what that's going to do in the long term is that senior artists in every field are eventually going to start retiring, and we're going to start seeing a shortage of experienced senior artists that are able and necessary to take on more complex tasks. So we may see a lot of companies either try and save money by outsourcing certain junior roles or perhaps even senior roles to AI. But I think in the long term, big companies need to be very cautious about leaning too heavily in this direction, because if they're using those tools and smaller indie developers are also using the same tools, then they really better watch out, to be honest, because the indie space is the space where I would argue the most innovation comes from. And if it becomes easier and, the visual quality level, the production cost for high quality looking games goes way down, especially for smaller developers, then large companies really are not going to be able to compete because they can't take as many risks. They need to take risks, or taking risks is an inherent part of innovation. And also an over-reliance on those tools at a company level is really going to cripple the industry in the long term, because the next generation of individuals that can solve nuanced creative problems won't exist. So I suppose that segues nicely into my sentiments or my thoughts about artists and what my current feeling is on the current landscape and where I think it's headed. I think it's understandable for artists to be feeling a little bit disenfranchised, very unsure about the future, and we're at a place now where, because of AI and economic factors, there's been a lot of layoffs in the industry recently. I'm no stranger to that. And whether staying in this industry is the right choice for them long term, especially if they have families to look after or any kind of financial responsibility. These are valid questions. for creatives to be grappling with at the moment. So I guess in light of the other things that I spoke about, advice I'd give myself, advice I'd give other creatives at the moment is, if you can, if you're in the financial position to do so, spend the time investing in the kind of skills that aren't easily replaceable. So developing your knowledge of fundamentals, focusing a lot more on conceptual mastery. So a heavy focus on what is good storytelling, what is compelling storytelling, what is compelling design, what resonates with other human beings. Focus on making connections between the technical skills required to tell a story with actually telling a story. It'll be the difference between, let's say in music, it'll be the difference between knowing a certain chord just on its own, or knowing how to artfully place that chord in the context of an entire song to communicate a feeling, to elicit a feeling from the listener at a certain point in the song in a way that connects with them. Don't completely ignore the tools that are being developed, because they are only going to get better. And so staying on top of AI-assisted workflows as a tool in the tool belt, don't completely rule it out, but really make sure all of those tools are integrated with a deeper understanding of high-level creative fundamentals, and also focusing on really understanding how to integrate artistic nuance and art direction, storytelling and world building into your work. I don't think those things are going to go away anytime soon. And also your ability to solve problems across various departments in a production team is going to be very powerful. I think expanding your skill set to include more tools will also make you more valuable. So you could be a 3D artist and have some technical art chops, or if you're an illustrator or 2D artist that knows how to create and prep assets for 2D art games, or perhaps you're a concept artist with a mixture of 2D and 3D skills that can bridge the gap between concept and production. Anything like that, I think, will be seen as valuable. So let's summarize and conclude the discussion and maybe take away some key points. I think AI has the potential to be a powerful tool in certain cases, but it should be treated as a tool in the tool belt, not a replacement, to be used strategically. I think we should stay informed, experiment where necessary, but continue to develop our fundamental creative skills. I do see it as being still very disruptive in the creative industry, and there are a lot of roles that are much more prescriptive, much less creative, and much more repetitive, that I think are in much more danger of being replaced in the long term. But that's coming from a concept artist. I'm not a 3D artist or an animator, so I'm not as plugged into that world. If this is you, if you are someone in that field, I'd love to hear your perspective. Throw a comment down below and let me know how you're feeling, if you agree, if you disagree with any of my thoughts on the matter. Again, this is just my off-the-cuff opinions. There's things about it that excite me and that I can see as being useful, and there are other things about it that raise a lot of concerns. So if this has been on your mind too, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think about it. And if you're curious about the footage that you can see in the background, I'm currently working on a fairly comprehensive environment design course that's going to utilize Photoshop and Blender, but it's really going to be tailored towards creating an environment portfolio piece that solves a lot of those fundamental creative problems that I was speaking about in this video, that hopefully really help specifically for concept art, for something to stand out and create value in the context of a production team. So if that's something you're interested in, do subscribe and join the mailing list to stay up to date with how that's going. Cheers. I'll see you in the next one.